I have always found it amusing how men in $3,000 suits can be utterly dismantled by the most boring paragraphs of federal law. They look at a $400 million aerospace contract and see only their own corporate genius. They never look down at the gritty, toxic reality keeping their factory alive. They certainly never notice the invisible, legal tripwire tied directly to my fingerprints, until it is entirely too late. Hello? Wonderful listeners of Boss Revenge Stories. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely disabled monetization on our channel, leaving us with zero budget to keep operating. If you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our hardworking staff, help them cover their living expenses, and continue bringing these stories to life for you. You can support us by scanning the QR code on your screen right now, or by clicking the donation link down in the description or the pinned comment. My name is Ivy Gonzalez. I am 34 years old, and I was the invisible architect of AeroVantage Synthetics. The air inside our advanced materials plant in Austin, Texas, always carried a distinct, metallic bite. It was a heavy blend of acetone, industrial lubricants, and synthesized resin that coated the back of your throat, a constant reminder of the volatile forces we were trying to tame. Down on the sprawling manufacturing floor, massive pressurized steel vats churned with experimental aerospace polymers. They baked under the relentless Texas sun, vibrating with the kind of kinetic energy that could level a city block if mishandled. High above the noise and the fumes, safely enclosed behind reinforced acoustic glass, sat the executive suites. Up there, the air conditioning pumped at a crisp 68 degrees, keeping the C-suite executives comfortable while they planned their early retirements. We were exactly 3 weeks away from securing a $400 million manufacturing contract with the Department of Defense. It was a company-making deal, the kind of astronomical payday that transformed a mid-level supplier into an industry titan overnight. But the men pacing those air-conditioned offices, pointing at glossy pitch decks and talking about synergy, had absolutely no grasp of the gritty, regulatory tightrope we walked every single day. That was my domain. I was the director of environmental compliance. Though they treated me more like a glorified janitor, my job was to manage the environmental hazard attestation system. It was an incredibly complex, unforgiving network of software bridges mandated directly by the Environmental Protection Agency. There was no room for creative interpretation in my department. My screens constantly monitored the volatile chemical storage sectors, calculating pressure thresholds, toxic output, and containment integrity down to the microsecond. But the federal government does not put its faith in software alone. The EPA demands a human throat to choke if an industrial disaster occurs. Because of the sheer volume of lethal chemicals housed within our facility, the law required a literal dead man's switch. I was the legally registered primary environmental steward for AeroVantage. My identity was tied to the plant's operational license at a federal level. Every single morning, before 8 o'clock, I had to place my right hand on a biometric scanner to verify my physical presence and active oversight. If my fingerprints were not logged, the system assumed the facility had been abandoned or compromised. It was programmed to trigger a hard, unyielding lockdown, automatically slamming heavy safety valves shut and completely cutting main power to the chemical mixing lines to prevent a catastrophic spill. You might assume that holding the keys to the entire production floor would command respect. You would be entirely mistaken. The corporate culture at AeroVantage was poisoned by a blind obsession with lean production. "We need to trim the fat," the CEO would say during quarterly reviews, waving his hands dismissively at my compliance reports. They treated physical manufacturing like a digital app, convinced that decades of safety regulations were just old-fashioned roadblocks that could be bypassed with the right algorithm. I spent years quietly shielding these arrogant men from the federal hammer. I kept the audits clean. I maintained the biometric lock, and I ensured the plant never suffered a single operational delay due to regulatory violations. I was brilliant at my job, but to them, My flawless record was just proof that my department was overstaffed and unnecessary. They saw peace and assumed they did not need a peacekeeper. The true warning signs began to surface just a few days ago. The whispers started down in the maintenance bays and quickly echoed up through the administrative corridors. The board of directors was getting anxious about the upcoming Department of Defense inspection. Instead of heavily investing in the compliance division to ensure a smooth audit, they had decided we needed an aggressive corporate restructuring. The rumor mill confirmed my darkest suspicions. They were bringing in a new chief operating officer, some hotshot flown directly in from Silicon Valley, tasked with optimizing our workflow and drastically cutting administrative overhead before the military signed the final paperwork. The battlefield was quiet for now, but standing in the shadow of those chemical vats, I could already feel the impending disruption. Marcus Thorne did not walk into our facility. He deployed himself like a disruptive software update. He was a 30-something chief operating officer freshly transplanted from the sterile incubators of Silicon Valley, while the rest of us wore steel-toed boots and fire-resistant canvas. Marcus strolled across the reinforced concrete floor in pristine, bright white designer sneakers that cost more than a specialized pneumatic valve. He had the manic, aggressive energy of a man who firmly believed that pouring molten chemicals into industrial molds was merely a logistical bug waiting to be patched. To Marcus, physical manufacturing was just another legacy platform to be aggressively optimized. He wasted zero time. Within 48 hours of his arrival, Marcus initiated a brutal, relentless cost-cutting campaign. He fired 3 veteran floor managers, men who knew the distinct sounds of failing pressure seals by ear, and replaced their combined 90 years of institutional knowledge with a cloud-based algorithmic scheduling software. The factory floor immediately felt the strain. Shifts overlapped clumsily, and maintenance tickets were deferred by the artificial intelligence to prioritize sheer production output. Our inevitable collision occurred on a Tuesday afternoon, during a high-stakes preparation meeting for the Department of Defense audit. We were gathered in the executive conference room, suspended above the deafening hum of the mixing lines. Marcus was pacing at the head of the table, tossing out startup cliches as if he were presenting at a tech convention. He kept using words like agile, frictionless, and synergy. "We need to aggressively pivot our compliance strategy," Marcus announced, slapping his hand against the glass whiteboard. "The military wants to see a forward-thinking, streamlined operation, not a sluggish bureaucracy choking on boomer-era red tape." I sat rigidly in my ergonomic chair, feeling the heat rise in my chest. I unclasped my hands and spoke clearly. "Marcus, those protocols are not corporate guidelines. They are non-negotiable federal regulations. We are dealing with highly volatile aerospace polymers. The Environmental Protection Agency dictates our exact handling procedures, and any deviation will result in immediate fines and a revoked operating license." Marcus rolled his eyes, a theatrical gesture aimed at the other executives in the room. "Ivy, I appreciate the passion. I really do. But we are living in the 21st century. We have machine learning. We have predictive analytics. We do not need a massive administrative bottleneck slowing down our throughput just to check a few boxes for the government." "It is not about checking boxes," I countered. Leaning forward, I needed him to understand the gravity of the situation. "I hold the legal liability for this facility. The federal attestation requirements demand a designated human steward to maintain the hazard network. My biometric signature is the only thing keeping the safety system from—" "Look, I am going to stop you right there," Marcus interrupted, talking loudly over me and waving his hand as if swatting away a persistent fly. "You are thinking linearly. You are clinging to the old paradigm. We are going to disrupt this entire sector by proving we can scale without the bloated oversight. Trust the algorithm. Ivy, it is time to let go of the handrails." He completely missed the point. He fundamentally did not comprehend that you cannot negotiate with a federal compliance mandate, nor can you disrupt the laws of chemistry with a slick PowerPoint presentation. It did not take long to uncover the true motivation behind his blind arrogance. Through a quiet conversation with a disgruntled payroll administrator, I learned the exact terms of Marcus Thorne's employment contract. He had secretly promised the board of directors a guaranteed 15% reduction in administrative overhead before the Department of Defense deal officially closed. If he hit that specific metric, it triggered a massive, multi-million-dollar performance bonus for himself. He did not care about the safety of the plant or the integrity of the military contract. He was simply cannibalizing our essential infrastructure to pad his own bank account before cashing out and moving on to his next corporate victim. The reality of my situation crystallized 2 days later. I was running a diagnostic on the secondary containment valves when I noticed a young, sharply dressed man hovering near my workstation. He was an external consultant, holding an expensive tablet, silently shadowing my daily routine. He asked vaguely probing questions about my login sequences, how I interpreted the automated chemical pressure alerts, and the exact keystrokes I used to verify the daily safety metrics. He was trying to map my brain. Marcus had hired him to figure out how to automate my responsibilities. They wanted to rip out the human element entirely, completely ignorant of the fact that the human element was the only thing legally anchoring the factory to the earth. As I watched the consultant furiously type notes into his tablet, the quiet frustration inside me hardened into something entirely different. I realized I was squarely on Marcus Thorne's chopping block. He was going to fire me to secure his multi-million-dollar bonus. But as I looked back at my biometric scanner, glowing softly on my desk, I knew he was walking blindly into a trap he did not even know existed. The summons came late on a Friday afternoon, precisely at 4:30. The sun was beginning to dip below the Texas horizon, casting long, harsh shadows across the industrial park. I was called up to the executive suite, directed not to my usual meeting room, but into a stark, glass-walled conference room that overlooked the main production floor. Marcus Thorne was already there, leaning against the heavy mahogany table. He was alone. There was no representative from Human Resources present, a glaring breach of standard corporate protocol that told me exactly how untouchable he believed himself to be. He did not offer me a seat. He simply slid a thick manila folder across the polished wood. He had a tight, self-satisfied smile on his face, the look of a man who had just solved a puzzle that everyone else thought was impossible. "Ivy, I am going to keep this brief," Marcus said, straightening his designer blazer. "We are restructuring the division, effective immediately. Your position as Director of Environmental Compliance is being eliminated. We have successfully integrated the new automated compliance artificial intelligence that our consultants mapped out. It is faster, it is entirely objective, and it completely removes the need for manual oversight. We are pivoting to a leaner, strictly digital governance model." I looked at him. I did not blink. I did not speak. I simply let his words hang in the chilled, air-conditioned air of the room. If I were the person he assumed I was, a desperate, mid-level manager clutching at her livelihood, I would have argued, I would have raised my voice. I would have desperately reminded him of the strict federal registry. I would have explained, slowly and clearly, that his shiny artificial intelligence could not physically place a human hand on the biometric lock required by the government. I would have warned him that the Department of Defense auditors were arriving next week, and that stripping the facility of its federally mandated human steward would violently blow up his $400 million deal. Instead, a cold, absolute silence settled over me. The pacing in my mind slowed to a crawl. I felt a terrifying total calm wash through my veins. It was the precise feeling of watching a target step willingly into the center of a sniper's crosshairs. Why interrupt an adversary when he is flawlessly executing his own destruction? "You have a generous severance package in that folder," Marcus continued, clearly unnerved by my lack of emotional response. He shifted his weight, his smile faltering just a fraction. 6 months of pay, extended health benefits, but I need your signature today, right now. In fact, so accounting can process the offboarding before the weekend. I opened the folder. I did not bother reading the paragraphs detailing my monetary compensation. I did not care about the money. My eyes scanned directly to the legal stipulations, hunting for one specific clause. I traced my finger down the heavy cardstock until I found it, the liability waiver. I read it 3 times to ensure the corporate lawyers had drafted it exactly as broadly as they usually did. The language was beautifully explicit. It stated that upon termination, I was immediately released, indemnified, and held completely harmless from any and all ongoing corporate liability, operational oversight, and regulatory responsibility regarding AeroVantage Synthetics, effective at exactly 5 o'clock post-meridiem on that exact day. I pulled a heavy steel pen from my pocket. I signed my full legal name on the dotted line. I closed the folder and slid it back across the table. "Thank you, Marcus," I said. My voice was perfectly flat. "I wish you the best of luck with your artificial intelligence." I turned and walked out of the glass room. I went downstairs to my unglamorous desk. I did not take any company files. I packed my personal notebook, my favorite coffee mug, and a framed photograph of my dog into a small cardboard box. On my way toward the main exit, I took a slight detour. I walked past Marcus's empty office, reached into my pocket, and dropped my hard plastic security badge squarely in the center of his immaculate glass desk. I did not go home. I drove my car straight out of the industrial park and headed directly downtown, navigating the Friday evening traffic with deliberate focus. I parked in front of a small, nondescript legal services building and walked inside to meet a licensed notary public. From my leather tote bag, I retrieved a pre-filled, highly specialized federal form. It was a formal cessation of stewardship declaration. It was the exact legal mechanism provided by the Environmental Protection Agency to protect a registered safety officer in the event they were suddenly removed from their post. I handed my driver's license to the notary, raised my right hand, and swore under oath that I was no longer in control of the volatile chemical storage at AeroVantage. She stamped the document with her heavy metal seal. With that single strike of ink, my identity was legally, permanently uncoupled from the factory's operating matrix. I immediately dropped the certified document into the overnight federal mail drop box right outside the door. By 6:30 that evening, I was sitting comfortably on my back porch. The Texas heat was finally breaking, yielding to a cool breeze. I poured myself a generous glass of dry red wine and leaned back in my wooden chair. I watched the sun dip below the tree line, painting the sky in deep shades of violet and orange. I took a slow sip, savoring the absolute tranquility of the moment. I knew that miles away, locked inside the cold, humming servers of AeroVantage Synthetics, a 72-hour federal countdown timer had just secretly started ticking. Monday morning arrived with the sterile, artificial brightness of a corporate victory lap. Marcus Thorne strutted across the elevated walkways of the manufacturing floor, trailed by 2 senior members of the board of directors. He gestured expansively toward the massive, glowing monitors suspended above the chemical mixing lines. Every single digital dashboard on the wall was radiating a vibrant, soothing green. According to the brand new artificial intelligence compliance tracker, operations were running at absolute peak efficiency. "As you can clearly see," Marcus boasted, his voice carrying confidently over the mechanical hum of the facility, "we have successfully eliminated the human bottleneck. The new system is handling the environmental oversight flawlessly. We are operating leaner, faster, and significantly cheaper. When the Department of Defense auditors arrive on Wednesday for the final walkthrough and the contract signing, they are going to see a facility that represents the absolute bleeding edge of modern manufacturing." The board members nodded approvingly, mesmerized by the sleek interface and the promise of a $400 million payday. They saw exactly what Marcus wanted them to see: a perfectly optimized machine churning out profit without friction. But beneath the glossy surface of those user interfaces, buried deep within the unglamorous, strictly regulated architecture of the federal hardware layer, a silent inquisition was taking place. At precisely 8 o'clock that Monday morning, the automated Environmental Protection Agency software bridge executed its daily routine. It reached out through the network, searching for the physical biometric handshake of the registered primary environmental steward. It pinged the scanner on my abandoned desk. It waited for my fingerprints. It found nothing but cold glass. Marcus's expensive artificial intelligence was completely blind to this interaction. The corporate AI was programmed to monitor production quotas and basic internal safety metrics. It had absolutely no jurisdiction over the federal lock. When the EPA system failed to detect my biometric signature, it did not flash a red warning on the main screens in the executive suite. It did not sound a loud alarm over the intercom. It operated exactly as the federal law dictated. It quietly logged a Level 1 warning into the deepest, hidden registry of the system, noting that the designated human steward was unverified. The federal 72-hour grace period officially began to tick down in the dark. By Tuesday afternoon, the invisible tension inside the network escalated. The system, having missed a second consecutive daily biometric check, automatically upgraded the internal status to a Level 2 alert. Following strict hazardous material containment protocols, the software initiated its first physical safeguard, a secondary safety valve, located deep within the volatile chemical storage sector, autonomously throttled down by exactly 10% to reduce potential flow rate in the absence of verified human oversight. Up in the main control room, a junior operations technician noticed a slight, unexpected drop in pressure on line 4. He flagged the anomaly and called Marcus over to his workstation. Marcus stared at the pressure gauge, his jaw tightening with clear annoyance. "It is just a sensor glitch," he declared dismissively, barely looking at the underlying code. "The new software is still calibrating with the legacy hardware. We cannot afford any localized pressure drops dragging down our daily output metrics right before the military arrives. Override the local alarm and force the valve back to 100% capacity." The technician hesitated for a fraction of a second, but Marcus's tone left no room for debate. The technician typed in the manual override command. The valve forced itself back open. The local alarm on their dashboard vanished, replaced once again by that comforting, lying green light. They had just manually bypassed a federal safety escalation, completely oblivious to the fact that they were accelerating their own doom. While Marcus was busy masking the symptoms of a terminal systemic failure, my Tuesday afternoon was decidedly more pleasant. I was sitting at a sunlit corner table in a high-end steakhouse downtown, enjoying a perfectly seared ribeye and a crisp glass of sparkling water. Sitting across from me was David, a senior official from the Department of Defense Regulatory Oversight Committee. Over my years managing AeroVantage's compliance, David and I had cultivated a professional relationship built on absolute mutual respect. He knew my audits were always flawless, and I knew exactly how his team liked their reports formatted. We were not discussing the upcoming $400 million contract. We were simply catching up on industry trends and sharing pleasantries. It was a relaxing, leisurely lunch. I smiled warmly, asked about his recent vacation, and let the afternoon drift by. I did not mention Marcus. I did not mention the artificial intelligence. I simply existed in a state of perfect serenity, securely anchored by the knowledge that the trap I left behind was functioning exactly as designed. The sun rose on Wednesday morning, bringing with it the heavy weight of corporate history. This was the day AeroVantage Synthetics was supposed to ascend to the highest tier of military contractors. At exactly 8 o'clock in the morning, the heavy glass doors of the AeroVantage lobby slid open. The lead Department of Defense inspectors, accompanied by a team of federal compliance officers, walked into the pristine reception area. They carried thick leather briefcases holding the final authorization papers for the $400 million agreement. Marcus was already waiting in the center of the lobby, wearing a brand-new custom-tailored suit, his face stretched into a triumphant, welcoming grin. He stepped forward, extending his hand to greet the men who were about to make him exceptionally wealthy. Deep inside the facility's server room, hidden away from the handshakes and the bright lights, the digital clock struck 8. The Environmental Protection Agency system reached out for the third and final time. It pinged the biometric scanner. It met empty air. The 72-hour legal grace period for a missing primary environmental steward officially expired. The silent countdown reached absolute zero at exactly 1 minute past 8 in the morning. The grand illusion of Marcus Thorne's brilliant corporate disruption violently, irreversibly shattered. the Automated Environmental Protection Agency system, acting blindly and perfectly under strict federal parameters, did exactly what it was programmed to do when abandoned. Lacking its mandated human overseer, it assumed the absolute worst-case scenario. It assumed an imminent, catastrophic chemical event. A piercing, dual-toned industrial siren erupted from every single high-decibel speaker mounted throughout the sprawling facility. It was a sound so loud, so abrasive, that it physically rattled the teeth in your skull and vibrated deep within your chest cavity. The pleasant, ambient lighting in the luxurious corporate lobby immediately snapped off, replaced instantly by the harsh, frantic strobing of blood-red emergency beacons. Out on the massive manufacturing floor, sheer mechanical chaos reigned supreme. The primary power breakers tripped with a rapid succession of deafening cracks, sounding exactly like heavy artillery fire. This completely severed the electricity to the massive, churning mixing lines. The rhythmic, thrumming heartbeat of the factory ground down to a sickening, heavy metallic screech as millions of pounds of moving machinery were forcefully, violently halted mid-cycle. Massive, reinforced steel blast doors, previously hidden seamlessly within the ceiling architecture, slammed down over the volatile chemical storage vats with earth-shaking thuds. The heavy hydraulic locks engaged with a synchronized, final clack, sealing the hazardous materials behind impenetrable titanium-laced bulkheads. In a span of less than 15 seconds, AeroVantage Synthetics transformed from a state-of-the-art aerospace manufacturing hub into a dark, locked-down, powerless tomb. And it happened right in front of the highly decorated military officers holding the $400 million contract. Marcus froze. His hand was still suspended in the air from his interrupted, welcoming handshake. The color rapidly, completely drained from his face, leaving his artificial California tan looking sickly and pale under the flashing red strobes. He spun around, his designer sneakers squeaking desperately against the polished marble floor as his brain desperately tried to process the complete collapse of his kingdom. "What is happening?" Marcus screamed, his carefully cultivated, arrogant startup calm entirely evaporating into raw panic. "Get information technology on the phone right now. Override this. Force a system reboot." He lunged across the reception area for the main security desk, shoving a terrified guard aside to grab the primary intercom microphone. He was shouting so frantically that his voice cracked. The head of the information technology department responded over the emergency radio channel, his voice trembling with sheer, unadulterated terror. "We cannot override it. Marcus, the new artificial intelligence is completely locked out of the core directory. This is a Tier 1 federal quarantine protocol. The primary compliance matrix has initiated a hard physical shutdown." "Then hack into it," Marcus bellowed, slamming his fist repeatedly against the mahogany desk. "Bypass the mainframes. We have the Department of Defense standing right here in the lobby." "Are you completely insane?" the IT director yelled back over the blaring sirens. "Bypassing a federal environmental lock is a Class A felony. We will all go to federal prison for decades. The system is demanding a physical biometric key to lift the quarantine. It needs the registered primary environmental steward. It needs Ivy Gonzalez." Marcus pulled his incredibly expensive smartphone from his tailored pocket with shaking, uncoordinated hands. He swiped frantically at the screen, hunting for my contact information. He dialed my number, holding the phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. Miles away, I was sitting comfortably on my back porch, enjoying a fresh cup of morning coffee. My phone buzzed cheerfully on the patio table. The caller ID flashed Marcus Thorne in bright letters. I smiled. It was a genuine, warm, deeply satisfied smile. I reached over and tapped the red button, sending the brilliant chief operating officer straight to a generic, automated voicemail. I took another slow, deliberate sip of my coffee, listening to the birds singing in the trees. Back in the strobing, deafening lobby, Marcus hurled his phone against the reinforced glass wall, shattering the screen into 100 pieces. He spun back to the Department of Defense inspectors, forcing a deeply unconvincing, manic smile onto his sweating face. "Just a minor software glitch, gentlemen," Marcus stammered, wiping a heavy bead of sweat from his forehead. A tiny integration error with our new artificial intelligence platform. We will have the production lines back up in 10 minutes. I guarantee it. The lead inspector, a man with steel gray hair and an expression carved entirely from granite, did not smile back. He did not care about Silicon Valley buzzwords or software glitches. He stepped forward, his voice cutting through the blaring sirens with terrifying, absolute authority. "I do not care about your artificial intelligence," the inspector barked. "I want to see your active federal compliance logs. Right now. Show me the certified transition plan for your environmental steward." Marcus faltered. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He had no transition plan. He had fired his registered, legally mandated steward to secure a 15% overhead reduction and his own multi-million-dollar performance bonus. The inspector pulled a heavy, ruggedized tablet from his briefcase. His fingers flew across the screen as he directly accessed the Federal Regulatory Registry. His eyes narrowed sharply. He looked up at Marcus with absolute, unfiltered disgust. "You fired your legally mandated safety officer," the inspector stated, his voice devoid of any warmth or patience. "You initiated a total systems overhaul of a volatile chemical plant without a federally approved replacement protocol." He slammed his heavy tablet shut. "This facility is profoundly compromised. We are halting all negotiations immediately. The $400 million contract is officially, permanently pulled from the table." "No, wait!" Marcus shrieked, desperation fully consuming whatever dignity he had left. He pointed a trembling finger at the air, grasping blindly at non-existent straws. "It was her! Ivy Gonzalez! She is a disgruntled former employee. She deliberately sabotaged the network before she left. She rigged the system to fail to extort us." The lead inspector stopped dead in his tracks. He slowly opened his tablet again and tapped the reinforced screen twice. He turned the device around, shoving it directly into Marcus's sweating face. "Do not insult my intelligence," the inspector growled, jabbing a finger at the glowing document on the screen. "I am looking at a federally stamped cessation of stewardship document, officially filed and legally notarized by Miss Gonzalez at 5:30 in the evening last Friday. She officially, legally transferred liability back to this corporation precisely because you terminated her without cause. She followed the law to the absolute letter, son. You are the one who broke it." The AeroVantage Board of Directors convened an emergency session in the shattered remains of their morning. The atmosphere in the executive suite had completely morphed from celebratory arrogance to sheer, unadulterated terror. The lead military inspector had given them a brutal ultimatum. They had exactly 4 hours to rectify the federal lock and present a legally bound steward, or the $400 million contract would be permanently revoked and awarded to a competitor. Marcus Thorne was given a single directive: fix the mess he created. He abandoned his ruined phone, grabbed his car keys, and drove recklessly across Austin to my neighborhood. I was in my kitchen, finishing my coffee, when the motion sensor on my front porch chimed. I pulled up the camera feed on my tablet. There was Marcus. His custom-tailored suit was wrinkled and stained with sweat. His tie was loosened, his hair was a mess, and his pristine white designer sneakers were scuffed. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire career dissolve in acid. He hammered his fist against my heavy oak door. "Ivy, please," Marcus begged, his voice distorted and tinny through the small exterior speaker. "I know you are in there. I am sorry. I was wrong. The board is giving me 4 hours to get you back on the scanner. We will double your old salary. We will give you your own department. Just open the door and come back to the facility with me." I leaned against my kitchen counter. I pressed the small microphone button on my tablet screen. "Hello, Marcus," I said calmly. "I am no longer an employee of AeroVantage Synthetics. I suggest you consult your artificial intelligence for a solution. Please step off my porch before I call the local authorities for trespassing." "Ivy, wait!" he screamed, his face pressing uncomfortably close to the wide-angle lens. "Please, they are going to fire me." I took my finger off the button. I did not watch him walk back to his car. I had an appointment to keep. Exactly 2 hours later, I walked through the sliding glass doors of the AeroVantage headquarters. I did not wear my usual canvas work clothes. I wore a sharp, charcoal gray tailored suit. Flanking my right side was Arthur Sterling, a high-powered corporate attorney I had retained specifically for this morning. The lobby was still flashing with red emergency beacons, and the deafening industrial sirens continued to wail. But I walked through the chaos with absolute, untroubled grace. We bypassed the security desk and took the executive elevator straight to the top floor. The boardroom was a scene of absolute despair. The board members were sweating through their expensive shirts. Marcus was sitting at the far end of the long mahogany table, holding his head in his hands. When the heavy wooden doors swung open and I stepped inside, every single head snapped toward me. Marcus stood up so fast his chair crashed backward onto the floor. "Ivy," the chairman of the board exhaled, practically falling over his own words. "Thank God. Please, go down to the primary terminal. We have the new contract ready for you to sign right after you log in." "I am not here to ask for my job back," I stated, my voice slicing effortlessly through the noise of the sirens echoing up from the floor below. I stepped forward, and Arthur placed a sleek leather folder onto the center of the table. He opened it, revealing a single, immaculately drafted document. "As of 9 o'clock this morning," I announced, looking directly into the chairman's eyes, "I officially launched my own independent environmental compliance consultancy. Furthermore, because of the highly specialized, proprietary nature of the network architecture I spent years building for this specific facility, my new firm is now the sole licensed vendor approved by the Environmental Protection Agency to manage your hazardous protocols." I pushed the contract across the polished wood. "I will walk downstairs, place my hand on the biometric scanner, and rescue your $400 million deal. But I will do it as an external contractor. My firm's fee is exactly triple my previous annual salary. The contract includes an ironclad, non-negotiable guarantee of zero interference from your operations department. You will never attempt to optimize, disrupt, or automate my federal oversight ever again." The chairman stared at the words on the page, his face pale, but he nodded slowly. He reached for his pen. "There is one final condition," I added, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. I finally turned my gaze to Marcus. "You must terminate Marcus Thorne, immediately, right here, in this room, and you must fire him for cause, specifically citing gross negligence and the direct endangerment of federal defense contracts. He will be stripped of his entire severance package, and he will forfeit every single performance bonus he tried to steal." "You cannot do that!" Marcus shrieked, his voice breaking into a high-pitched whine. "I am the chief operating officer. I brought vision to this company." The chairman did not even look at him. He signed his name at the bottom of my contract. He pressed the intercom button on the console in front of him. "Security, send 2 guards up to the boardroom. We need a former executive escorted off the premises." It took less than 3 minutes. The entire administrative staff watched in stunned silence as 2 burly security guards grabbed Marcus Thorne by his arms and frog-marched him toward the elevator. He was thrashing and yelling, his designer sneakers dragging across the floor, completely stripped of his dignity, his bonus, and his career. With my signed contract securely in Arthur's briefcase, I walked down to the manufacturing floor. I stood before the primary control terminal. I placed my right hand onto the glowing glass of the biometric scanner. The system read my fingerprints. It verified my pulse. The deafening sirens instantly ceased. The strobing red lights vanished, replaced by a warm, steady white glow. Deep within the facility, the heavy blast doors slowly rose, and the massive mixing lines roared back to life with a triumphant mechanical hum. The power was restored. I stood alone in the quiet center of the control room, breathing in the sharp, metallic air, and reclaimed my kingdom. Thank you so much to everyone for listening to my story today. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please let me know your city or country down in the comments. If you found today's story entertaining and satisfying, please consider helping our team out with a donation of just $1. You can scan the QR code right here on the screen, or use the donation link in the video description or the pinned comment. YouTube has cut off our funding, and your support is the only way we can pay our staff. help them feed their families, and continue creating these great revenge stories for you. Thank you again, and have a wonderful day.